Imagine paying like $1.58 more per gallon of gas than the rest of the country, and nobody can entirely agree on exactly why.
Yeah, it sounds like a math problem missing a crucial variable, right?
Exactly.
But for millions of drivers, that missing variable translates into a very expensive daily reality.
It really does. I
Yeah.
mean, picture this scenario. It's Memorial Day weekend. Millions of people are packing up their cars, hitting the road, and pulling up to the pump. And in California recently, those drivers were staring down an average price of $6.14 a gallon.
Ouch. That is some serious sticker shock.
Right. And that kind of sticker shock does more than just drain a wallet. It sparks massive political firestorms. Governor Gavin Newsom actively took to the microphone, telling Californians to straight up boycott Chevron.
Wow, a direct boycott call.
Yeah, he urged drivers to skip the famous brand and just buy unbranded gas instead. But Chevron did not just take that lying down. They fought back by slapping QR codes directly onto their gas pumps.
Wait, really? On the pumps themselves?
Yes. And when customers scan those codes, they land on a page blaming the governor's own environmental policies for the outrageous prices. So we are watching a billion-dollar blame game playing out right at the pump.
The stakes are astronomical. I mean, one of the largest economies in the world is going head-to-head with one of the most powerful energy corporations on the planet.
Exactly. So, welcome to the deep dive. We have a massive stack of highly polarized sources to go through today.
We really do. We're looking at raw government agency data, press releases from left-leaning consumer watchdog groups, field reports from Fox Business, and op-eds from conservative think tanks like the Independent Institute.
And because these sources contain heavily polarized, politically charged content from both left-wing and right-wing viewpoints, let's just lay our cards on the table right now.
Big idea.
We are not taking sides. We're not endorsing any political viewpoint here. Our mission isn't to tell you who is right. We are just here to neutrally report the data and the arguments from all sides so you can understand the mechanics of California's sky-high gas prices.
We just want to follow the data.
Right.
And, building a factual foundation is really the only way to cut through all that political noise. Before we can untangle who's to blame, we have to look at the anatomy of a single gallon of gas in California. We need to define those baseline costs.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you look at the hard numbers, the tax burden is heavy. First, you have the state excise tax, which is 61.2 cents per gallon. That's the highest in the entire nation.
Wow.
Yeah. Add in the federal tax, which sits at 18.4 cents. Toss on a 2-cent underground storage fee. If we stop right there, we're looking at about 81 cents in standard taxes.
Right, but then the environmental policies enter the equation. And those policies are entirely unique to the state. The primary drivers are the cap-and-trade program, which adds roughly 25 cents to a gallon, and the low-carbon fuel standard, or LCFS, which adds about 17 cents.
Hold on, I need to pause you there, because tossing around terms like cap and trade kind of obscures what is actually happening to the consumer. How does a broad environmental policy translate into a direct 25-cent charge on my gallon of gas?
It's a great question. Think of cap and trade as a statewide pollution budget. The government caps the total amount of greenhouse gases that industries are allowed to emit. If an oil refinery wants to operate, it has to hold allowances, essentially permission slips, for the pollution it creates.
Okay, permission slips.
Right. And because those permission slips are limited, refineries have to buy them at state-run auctions. That costs the refinery millions of dollars.
Ah, I see.
And the refinery doesn't just swallow that cost, right? They bake it directly into the wholesale price of the fuel. The low-carbon fuel standard works in a very similar way.
Got it. So combining all of that, the state tax, federal tax, storage fees, cap and trade, LCFS, that creates a combined baseline burden of about $1.25 per gallon.
Exactly.
Which accounts for roughly 27% of the total sticker price. It's like buying a concert ticket where the base price looks normal, but the mandated venue fees and convenience taxes add 27% to your bill before you even get in the door.
That's a perfect analogy. And what's fascinating here is the underlying motivation for those fees. The state isn't just collecting money for fun. California has legally bound itself to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045.
Right, they have huge climate goals.
They do. They enforce these declining carbon standards, and they require special summer fuel blends to fight smog. And, the state projects that by cutting this pollution, they'll save $200 billion in long-term health costs. We're talking about preventing thousands of premature deaths.
But not everyone views that long-term payoff as a fair trade for the immediate pain at the pump, do they?
Definitely not. Conservative sources, particularly the Independent Institute, push back really hard on that structure. They argue these are highly regressive taxes.
Meaning they disproportionately hurt low-income drivers.
Exactly. The argument is that wealthy tech workers driving electric vehicles are insulated from these costs, while working-class folks who commute long distances in older gas cars are spending a huge chunk of their take-home pay just fueling up.
Okay, but let's do some basic math here. Even if we concede that $1.25 is just pure taxes and green initiatives, the numbers still do not align.
How do you mean?
Well, if the national average is $3.20, adding the California tax burden only gets us to $4.45. But drivers are paying over $6, we are missing almost $1.70. Where is that coming from?
Well, a big portion of that remaining gap comes down to geography and infrastructure. Economists call it the island effect.
I'm looking at a map right now, and California shares massive borders with Oregon, Nevada, and Arizona. It is definitively not an island.
Well, physically, no. But logistically, it operates exactly like one. Remember that special smog-fighting summer blend we just talked about?
Right, the unique recipe.
Yeah, because California mandates that specific recipe, the state is completely isolated from the national supply chain. You can't just pump standard gasoline from Texas, pipe it over the mountains, and sell it in LA. It's illegal.
Wow. So because of this special fuel recipe, California is effectively stranded on a fuel island. If one local refinery breaks down, there's no lifeboat coming from Nevada.
Precisely, and that makes the local refinery situation incredibly fragile. Over the last year, California lost nearly 18% of its refining capacity, and just 4 companies control 90% of the in-state refining.
Wait, 4 companies control 90%? That sounds like an oligopoly. Why hasn't a competitor just swooped in to build a new refinery and undercut the prices?
Because the barrier to entry is just too high. Building a multi-billion-dollar oil refinery in a state committed to ending fossil fuels by 2045 is an impossible pitch to investors, so the market stays concentrated.
And when a market is that concentrated, without a safety net, any supply shock is devastating.
Right. We also have to layer global geopolitics over this. Governor Newsom's office points out that global conflicts, like the Iran war, have tracked an estimated 20% of the global oil supply in the Persian Gulf. That raises the baseline cost of crude everywhere.
So the fuel island feels that global squeeze even more intensely.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have taxes and we have an isolated supply chain. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even after all of that, state oversight reports show there is still a massive unexplained gap in the price.
Yes, the mystery surcharge.
A mystery surcharge. These reports identified a 41-cent per gallon gap that cannot be linked to taxes, crude oil costs, or environmental programs. And this unexplained gap has cost consumers $59 billion since 2015.
$59 billion, that's not a rounding error.
No, that is the GDP of a small nation just unaccounted for at the pump. And this leads us to the core of the governor's feud with big oil.
Right. Newsom points directly at the brand premium. His data shows that Chevron charges 60 to 80 cents more per gallon than unbranded gas.
And think about what you were actually buying. Unbranded gas comes from the exact same refineries. It meets the exact same state standards. You're paying an extra 80 cents just for a fancy additive name like Chevron and a recognizable logo.
Consumer Watchdog reports that Chevron stations average an 84-cent retail margin per gallon. Costco, on the other hand, operates on a 41-cent margin.
So consumer groups see that and call it unchecked corporate price gouging.
They do, but the industry pushes back hard. They argue the mystery surcharge is completely fictional. They say it just reflects the higher costs of doing business in California: labor, minimum wage, utility rates.
Right. Leasing a corner lot in San Francisco costs a lot more than one in Houston.
Exactly.
So with billions of dollars and political reputations on the line, this has escalated into a massive PR war. Consumer Watchdog claims Chevron funded a group called Californians for Energy Independence with $13.7 million.
Wow.
Yeah, to run social media ads directly blaming state lawmakers for the high prices.
And Chevron defends themselves by calling Newsom's boycott deeply unfair. They point out that most Chevron stations are independently owned small businesses that set their own prices based on local overhead.
Which brings us to the massive corporate exodus. Chevron recently announced it is moving its corporate headquarters from California to Texas after over a century.
Yeah, Executive Andy Wall said California is just a tough place to do business. He cited the regulatory environment making it impossible to recruit employees.
So I have to ask you, is moving to Texas a genuine business survival tactic, or is it the ultimate political mic drop in a billion-dollar feud?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights the central tension. How does a state aggressively pursue 100% clean energy and heavily regulate an industry while still trying to keep fuel affordable and retain major corporate employers?
It's a highware balancing act, and right now the everyday driver is the one carrying the historic burden.
For sure.
But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought based on these sources. California law mandates that 100% of new light-duty vehicles sold must be zero emission by 2035.
That's coming up fast.
It is. As more people switch to electric cars, the demand for gas will plummet, and refineries and gas stations will inevitably start closing. Will the remaining gas car drivers, who might be the folks who simply can't afford a new electric vehicle, end up footing an even higher, more concentrated bill just to keep this shrinking, isolated fuel island afloat?
That is a very sobering thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
Next time you pull up to the pump, you'll know there's a lot more going on than just the price of crude oil. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.